In every corner of the world, under rustling pines, behind creeping fog, and beyond the reach of radio signals, there are stories whispered but never confirmed. From teenagers torn from tents to soldiers vanished in the dead of night, these brutal, unexplained attacks share one chilling thread: something massive, primal, and disturbingly human. Survivors speak of beasts that walk upright, with intelligence behind their eyes and violence in their wake. Official stories rarely match survivor accounts, but patterns emerge for those willing to look. From Grayson Pines, Washington to the Baitani Highlands of India, here are 6 stories. Grayson Pines, Washington, May 31, 2025. The dense forest of Grayson Pines stretched across 43 square miles of Washington's remote Cascade foothills, a wilderness area that had remained officially closed to public access since a devastating landslide in 2019 claimed the lives of 2 park rangers. The closure signs posted along the perimeter warned of unstable terrain and dangerous wildlife, but these warnings meant little to 5 teenagers seeking the perfect spot for an undisturbed Memorial Day weekend celebration. Kyle Metz had discovered the location 3 weeks earlier while researching abandoned hiking trails online. The 19-year-old college sophomore convinced his friends that the restricted area would provide the ideal backdrop for their traditional end-of-spring campfire party. Shayna Crowley, 18 and known for her adventurous spirit, immediately agreed to join the expedition. Eddie Darnell, a stocky football player from their high school days, volunteered to carry the heavier camping equipment. Leo Tran, the group's designated photographer, packed his camera gear alongside camping supplies. Madison Brigg, the youngest at 17, initially hesitated, but ultimately decided to participate after Kyle assured her the trip would be completely safe. The group parked their vehicles 2 miles from the forest entrance on the afternoon of May 30th and hiked through increasingly dense woodland to reach a clearing approximately 4 miles from the nearest marked trail. Kyle had identified this spot using satellite imagery, noting its proximity to a small creek and the natural fire pit formed by a ring of large stones. The clearing appeared perfect for their purposes, surrounded by towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks that created a natural amphitheater. They established their campsite efficiently, with Leo documenting their setup process, while Eddie and Kyle assembled the tents. Shayna and Madison gathered firewood from the abundant deadfall scattered throughout the surrounding forest. As evening approached, they built a substantial fire and began cooking the food they had brought for their celebration. The atmosphere remained festive and relaxed throughout the night, with the group sharing stories and taking pleasure in the isolation from their usual urban environment. According to Kyle's later testimony, the first sign of trouble occurred around 2:30 in the morning, when they heard what sounded like heavy footsteps moving through the forest beyond the firelight. Initially, they dismissed these sounds as typical forest activity, possibly a deer or elk moving through the underbrush. However, the footsteps appeared to circle their campsite in a deliberate pattern, maintaining a consistent distance from their fire while never fully retreating. Leo suggested they investigate the source of the sounds, but Kyle argued they should remain near the fire until dawn. The footsteps continued for approximately 20 minutes before stopping abruptly, leaving an unsettling silence that made conversation difficult. Shayna reported hearing what she described as heavy breathing coming from the darkness, though the others could not confirm this observation. The attack began without warning at approximately 3:15 in the morning. Kyle later described seeing a massive figure emerge from the tree line, standing at least 8 feet tall and covered in dark matted hair. The creature moved with surprising speed and purpose, heading directly toward Eddie, who had been sitting closest to the forest edge. Kyle reported that Eddie barely had time to stand before the creature seized him with enormous hands and lifted him off the ground. What followed was a scene of absolute chaos. Madison screamed as the creature appeared to tear Eddie apart with its bare hands, an act that Kyle described as happening with horrifying ease. Leo attempted to help Eddie but was immediately knocked unconscious by a single blow from the creature's massive arm. Shayna tried to run toward the tents but tripped over the fire pit's stone ring and fell heavily to the ground. Kyle found himself paralyzed by terror as the creature turned its attention to the other members of their group. He watched helplessly as it pursued Shayna, who had managed to regain her footing and was running toward the dense forest. Her screams echoed through the trees before ending abruptly in the darkness. The creature then returned to where Madison had been attempting to hide behind one of their tents, and Kyle heard her final cry before silence returned to the clearing. Somehow, Kyle managed to overcome his paralysis and began running through the forest in the opposite direction from where his friends had disappeared. He ran blindly through the darkness, branches tearing at his clothes and face, until exhaustion forced him to stop. He spent the remainder of the night hiding beneath a fallen log, listening for any sounds that might indicate the creature was pursuing him. At dawn, Kyle resumed his desperate flight through the forest, following what he hoped was the direction back to their vehicles. A local hunter named Robert Kellerman discovered him around 7:30 in the morning, approximately 2 miles from the campsite. Kyle was barefoot, having lost his shoes during his panicked escape, and appeared to be in severe psychological distress. Kellerman immediately contacted local authorities, who organized a search and rescue operation that reached the campsite by late morning. The scene they discovered confirmed that something violent had occurred during the night. The tents had been completely destroyed, appearing to have been torn apart by tremendous force. Several nearby trees showed damage consistent with something large having struck them repeatedly. Blood trails led in multiple directions from the campsite, but search teams were unable to locate any bodies despite extensive efforts over the following week. The official investigation concluded that a large predator had attacked the group, most likely a black bear that had been attracted to their food supplies. However, several aspects of the scene troubled the investigating officers. The damage to the trees appeared inconsistent with typical bear behavior, and the size of the footprints found around the campsite exceeded measurements for any known bear species in the region. Kyle maintained throughout his interviews with investigators that their attacker had not been a bear. He insisted that he had clearly seen a bipedal creature covered in dark hair, with human-like hands and facial features. Mental health professionals who evaluated Kyle found him to be credible, but noted that extreme trauma could affect perception and memory formation. Despite official attempts to maintain confidentiality, details of Kyle's account began circulating among local residents within days of the incident. The combination of the mysterious circumstances and Kyle's persistent claims about the nature of their attacker sparked widespread speculation about the presence of unknown creatures in the Grayson Pines area. Local residents began referring to the attack site as the Blackfire Hollow, and hunting and hiking activity in the region decreased dramatically. Several longtime outdoorsmen reported they no longer felt comfortable entering the forest after dark, citing an inexplicable sense of being watched during recent visits to nearby areas. Kyle returned to college the following semester but dropped out after 6 weeks, unable to concentrate on his studies. He currently lives with his parents and has declined all requests for media interviews. The families of the 4 missing teenagers continue to press for additional investigation, but authorities maintain that the case remains officially closed. The Kotez National Preserve sprawled across 17,000 hectares of Serbia's mountainous interior, its dense woodlands and steep ravines creating a wilderness that had remained largely untouched by modern development. The preserve, established in 1987, encompassed some of the most challenging terrain in the Balkans, with elevations ranging from 800 to over 2,000 meters above sea level. Local villages surrounding the preserve had maintained an uneasy relationship with the deep forests for generations, passing down warnings about areas where hunters should not venture alone. Friends Milos and Dragan Petrovic operated a small hiking guide service from the town of Uzic, specializing in multi-day expeditions through the preserve's remote trails. Milos, 34 and the more experienced of the two, had been leading groups through these mountains for over a decade. Dragan, 28, had joined the business 3 years earlier after completing his military service. Their reputation for safety and knowledge of the terrain had earned them steady bookings throughout the hiking season. On September 15, 2002, the two guides departed Uzic with a group of 6 hikers from Germany who had booked a 3-day wilderness expedition. The group included 2 married couples in their 40s and 2 university students researching Balkan ecosystems. The planned route would take them through the preserve's central highlands, following ancient shepherd paths that connected remote meadows and seasonal camps. The first day proceeded without incident, as they followed well-marked trails through deciduous forests, displaying early autumn colors. The group established their first camp in a clearing beside a mountain stream, where Milos prepared traditional Serbian camp meals, while Dragan shared local folklore about the region's history. The German hikers expressed enthusiasm about the pristine wilderness and the absence of other tourists in the area. Weather conditions deteriorated overnight, with a dense fog rolling through the mountains that reduced visibility to less than 10 meters. Milos initially considered delaying their departure until conditions improved, but weather forecasts suggested the fog would persist for several days. The group voted to continue their planned route, trusting the guides' intimate knowledge of the terrain to guide them safely through the limited visibility. They began the second day's hike at dawn, moving slowly through the thick fog along what Milos knew to be a reliable trail. The fog created an otherworldly atmosphere, muffling sounds and making distance estimation nearly impossible. Dragan later reported that the group remained in good spirits despite the challenging conditions, with several hikers commenting on the mysterious beauty of the fog-shrouded forest. The first indication of trouble occurred around midday when Dragan noticed that the usual forest sounds had ceased completely. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals, not even the sound of wind moving through the trees. This sudden silence struck him as unnatural, though he chose not to alarm the group by mentioning his observation. Milos, leading the group approximately 20 meters ahead, appeared unaware of the change in their environment. According to Dragan's account, they were establishing their second camp in a small meadow when something began stalking them through the fog. He first became aware of their stalker when he heard what sounded like footsteps moving parallel to their position, maintaining pace with their group, but staying hidden in the dense mist. The footsteps appeared too heavy and too widely spaced to belong to any known wildlife in the region. Milos was organizing the evening meal preparation when the incident escalated. Dragan described hearing his friend shout a warning before the sound was cut short by what he could only describe as a roar, unlike anything he had encountered during his years in these mountains. The fog made it impossible to see more than a few meters in any direction, but he could hear sounds of a violent struggle, accompanied by screams and shouts from their German clients. Something massive moved through their camp with terrifying speed and purpose. Dragan felt claws rake across his arms as he attempted to reach Milos's position, leaving deep gashes that would require extensive medical treatment. The chaos continued for several minutes before an eerie silence returned to the meadow, broken only by Dragan's own labored breathing as he crouched motionless behind a large boulder. He remained hidden until the fog began to lift the following morning, revealing a scene of destruction. The tents had been shredded, camping equipment scattered across a wide area, and clear signs that something of enormous size and strength had torn through their campsite. Most disturbing were the massive footprints pressed deep into the soft earth around the meadow, prints that measured nearly 50 centimeters in length and showed clear impressions of 5 toes. Search and rescue teams reached the site 3 days later after Dragan was discovered, disoriented and injured along a logging road 15 kilometers from the attack location. 3 of the hikers, including one of the couples and one student, were later found alive but in severe shock. They had become separated during the confusion and had taken shelter in a rocky ravine nearby. The others, including Milos, were never located. Despite extensive efforts involving over 100 personnel, authorities were not able to determine the cause of the incident. The official investigation attributed the event to an attack by a pack of wolves, though several inconsistencies in this explanation troubled the investigating officers. The size and depth of the footprints found at the scene exceeded any known animal in Serbia's forests. Additionally, the pattern of destruction suggested a single attacker rather than a pack, and the conflicting accounts and physical injuries raised questions that the official report could not adequately address. Local residents familiar with the preserve's history were not surprised by the incident. Village elders spoke quietly of the Sumski Kovek, or forest man, a creature their ancestors had described in warnings passed down for generations. These stories described a massive, hair-covered being that inhabited the deepest parts of the preserve and attacked intruders who ventured too far from established paths. Dragan never returned to his guiding career and moved to a small apartment in Uzice where he lived as a recluse. Neighbors reported that he rarely left his home and never spoke about the events in the preserve. He declined all requests from investigators, journalists, and researchers who sought additional details about the attack. Mental health professionals who evaluated him noted severe post-traumatic stress, but found his account consistent and credible. The Kotes National Preserve experienced a dramatic decrease in hiking activity following the incident. Local authorities quietly discouraged tourism in the preserve's more remote areas, citing concerns about unpredictable wildlife behavior. The meadow where the attack occurred was eventually removed from official trail maps, and warning signs were posted at several access points, advising hikers to avoid the region's interior during fog conditions. Village residents continued to report occasional sightings of large bipedal figures moving through the forest at dawn and dusk, though none have been officially documented or investigated. Okaloa Forest Reserve, Queensland, Australia, March 1991. The Okaloa Forest Reserve encompasses 12,000 hectares of subtropical rainforest along Queensland's eastern coast, approximately 80 kilometers north of Brisbane. Within the reserve's boundaries stood an abandoned ranger station that had been constructed in 1971, but decommissioned 8 years later due to budget constraints and its isolated location. The single-story timber building sat in a small clearing approximately 15 kilometers from the nearest maintained road, connected only by an overgrown four-wheel drive track that required specialized vehicles to navigate safely. Judith Harlow, a 26-year-old graduate student, had received permission to conduct a 2-week study of nocturnal marsupial behavior in the reserve's interior. Her research focused on documenting feeding patterns and territorial ranges of sugar gliders and possums in undisturbed forest environments. The abandoned ranger station provided an ideal base for her fieldwork, offering basic shelter while minimizing human impact on the wildlife she intended to study. Trent Mallory, a 24-year-old undergraduate student majoring in wildlife biology, volunteered to assist Judith with her research project. His responsibilities included maintaining recording equipment, documenting observations, and assisting with the transportation of supplies to the remote location. Both students had extensive experience with wilderness camping and felt confident about spending extended periods in isolated natural environments. They established their research base at the ranger station on March 18, 1991, after a challenging 4-hour drive through deteriorated forest tracks. The building's interior remained in reasonable condition despite years of abandonment, with a functional generator providing electricity for the recording equipment and basic lighting. Judith set up multiple audio recording stations around the clearing to capture the sounds of nocturnal animals throughout the night. Their research proceeded successfully for 3 days, with both students documenting extensive marsupial activity in the surrounding forest. The recordings captured numerous species of possums, gliders, and other small mammals moving through the canopy during nighttime hours. Judith expressed satisfaction with the quality of data they were collecting and planned to extend their stay beyond the original 2-week timeline. On the evening of March 21st, Judith decided to conduct an overnight observation session from a hide she had constructed approximately 50 meters from the ranger station. This position would allow her to observe marsupial feeding behavior without the interference of artificial lighting from the building. Trent remained at the station to monitor the recording equipment and maintain communication via two-way radio. The recording equipment began detecting unusual sounds around midnight, picking up deep growling noises that neither student could identify. The growls appeared to originate from multiple locations around their camp, suggesting the presence of several large animals moving through the surrounding forest. Trent attempted to contact Judith via radio, but received no response to his calls, though this was not unusual, given the dense forest canopy's interference with radio signals. At approximately 12:30 in the morning, the growling sounds intensified and appeared to move closer to the ranger station. Trent later described hearing what sounded like heavy footsteps circling the building, accompanied by scratching sounds on the exterior walls. He attempted to observe the source of these sounds through the station's windows, but could see nothing in the darkness beyond the reach of their generator-powered lights. The sounds continued until approximately 3 in the morning before gradually fading into the distance. Trent spent the remainder of the night inside the locked ranger station, periodically attempting to contact Judith through the radio without success. He assumed she had experienced equipment failure or had decided to maintain radio silence to avoid disturbing the wildlife she was observing. When dawn arrived, Trent ventured outside to investigate Judith's observation hide and found it completely destroyed. The wooden structure had been torn apart with tremendous force, with pieces scattered across a wide area of the forest floor. Judith was missing, but signs at the scene, disturbed vegetation, missing gear and shattered equipment, suggested she had left the area quickly and under duress. Trent discovered large, unusual footprints in the soft earth near the destroyed hide, prints that measured approximately 45 centimeters in length and showed the clear impression of 5 toes. The footprints followed a trail that led deeper into the forest, but Trent chose not to pursue it alone. Instead, he returned to the ranger station to collect essential supplies before beginning the long hike back to the reserve's entrance. During his return journey, Trent encountered something that would haunt him for years afterward. While crossing a small creek approximately 3 kilometers from the ranger station, he observed a large bipedal figure covered in dark hair watching him from across the water. The creature appeared to be over 2 meters tall and displayed human-like intelligence in its behavior, studying Trent carefully before disappearing into the dense undergrowth. The creature's appearance motivated Trent to increase his pace significantly, and he reached the reserve entrance by late afternoon. Park rangers immediately organized a search and rescue operation, but extensive efforts over the following week failed to locate any sign of Judith or her remaining equipment. Her disappearance was officially classified as unresolved. Several aspects of the incident troubled the investigating officers. The destruction of Judith's observation hide appeared inconsistent with typical crocodile behavior, and the size and pattern of the footprints found at the scene did not match any known Australian wildlife. Additionally, Trent's detailed description of the bipedal creature he encountered during his escape raised questions that the official report could not address satisfactorily. Local Aboriginal elders from the surrounding region were not surprised by the incident when park authorities consulted them about traditional knowledge of the area's wildlife. They spoke of ancient stories describing large, hairy beings that inhabited the deepest parts of the coastal forests, warning against disturbing certain areas during specific times of the year. Following the incident, park authorities quietly discouraged research activities in the interior sections of the reserve. The abandoned ranger station was permanently sealed, and access to the surrounding area was restricted to essential personnel only. Warning signs were installed at several trail entrances, advising visitors about dangerous wildlife and the importance of maintaining appropriate safety protocols. Trent completed his degree, but never pursued a career in wildlife biology as originally planned. He relocated to Melbourne, where he worked in environmental consulting, avoiding assignments that required extended time in remote forest environments. He declined requests for interviews about the incident and rarely discussed his experience with colleagues or friends. The Okaloa Forest Reserve continues to attract researchers and nature enthusiasts, though few venture into the remote interior where Judith disappeared. Park rangers occasionally report unusual sounds and sightings from the abandoned ranger station area, but these incidents are rarely documented or investigated officially. Local Aboriginal communities maintain their traditional warnings about respecting the forest's deeper mysteries and avoiding areas where ancient beings still roam. The Vesmond Provincial Trail spans 47 kilometers of Alberta's Rocky Mountain foothills, encompassing rugged terrain that ranges from dense boreal forests to exposed glacial valleys carved by ancient ice movements. Connor McGill, Derek Lanes, and Yvette Romo were senior students at a local high school working on a collaborative science project investigating the acoustic properties of natural rock formations. Their physics teacher had approved their proposal to record and analyze sound echoes in various geological settings throughout Alberta's provincial park system. The project combined elements of geology, physics, and environmental science, subjects in which all three students excelled academically. Connor, 17 and the group's designated leader, had extensive experience with outdoor recreation through his family's involvement in mountaineering and wilderness camping. Derek, also 17, contributed technical expertise with recording equipment borrowed from the school's audio-visual department. Yvette, 16, and the youngest member of their group, possessed strong organizational skills and maintained detailed documentation of their experimental procedures and results. On October 12, 1984, the three students obtained permission from their parents and school administrators to conduct a weekend field study at the Glacial Valley section of the Vesmond Provincial Trail. Their planned experiment involved dropping rocks of various sizes into the canyon and recording the resulting echoes to analyze how sound waves interacted with different geological formations. The location offered ideal conditions for their research, with steep canyon walls creating natural acoustic chambers. The students established their base camp in a designated camping area approximately 2 kilometers from the canyon rim, following all recommended safety protocols for backcountry hiking. Weather conditions were favorable, with clear skies and moderate temperatures typical for mid-October in the region. They spent their first evening reviewing experimental procedures and testing their recording equipment to ensure proper functionality. On the morning of October 13th, they hiked to their selected research site where the dried riverbed had created a canyon approximately 60 meters deep with sheer limestone walls. Connor and Derek positioned themselves at the canyon rim while Yvette operated the recording equipment from a position approximately 20 meters back from the edge. Their methodology involved dropping standardized rocks while recording the resulting acoustic patterns for later analysis. The experiment proceeded successfully for approximately 2 hours, with the students collecting numerous recordings of echoes with varying characteristics depending on rock size and drop location. Yvette maintained careful documentation of each trial, noting weather conditions, exact drop times, and preliminary observations about echo duration and clarity. The canyon's acoustic properties exceeded their expectations, producing complex echo patterns that would provide excellent data for their project analysis. Around midday, they began hearing what appeared to be their own voices calling from various locations around the canyon rim. Initially, they assumed these sounds were delayed echoes from their earlier conversations, though the timing and clarity seemed unusual given the acoustic patterns they had been recording. Derek suggested that atmospheric conditions might be creating unexpected sound reflection patterns, causing their voices to bounce between rock formations in unpredictable ways. The voice mimicry became increasingly sophisticated and disturbing as the afternoon progressed. The students reported hearing perfect reproductions of their conversations from earlier in the day, including specific phrases and even laughter, emanating from locations where no one was present. Most unsettling were instances when they heard their names being called in their own voices from different directions simultaneously. Yvette began expressing concern about these phenomena, suggesting they should return to their base camp until they could understand what was causing the unusual acoustic effects. Connor initially dismissed her concerns, attributing the sounds to natural echo patterns they had not yet learned to interpret correctly. However, when they heard Connor's voice calling for help from a location where he was clearly visible at the canyon rim, all three students agreed that something beyond normal acoustic reflection was occurring. The situation escalated when the mimicked voices began calling to them from the direction of their base camp, using phrases like "come back" and "help us" in their own voices. These calls seemed designed to lure them away from the canyon rim and back toward their camping area. Against their better judgment, the students decided to investigate the source of these calls, believing that other hikers might have encountered some form of emergency situation. They followed a well-marked trail leading back toward their base camp, with the mimicked voices seeming to stay approximately 50 meters ahead of their position. The voices continued calling their names and urging them to hurry, maintaining the illusion that their friends needed assistance. As they moved deeper into the forest, the trail became less distinct, and they realized they were being led away from familiar territory. Derek was the first to recognize that they were being deliberately misled by something that could perfectly imitate their voices. He insisted they should stop following the sounds and attempt to return to the main trail using their compass bearings. However, by this time, they had wandered several kilometers from their intended route and were no longer certain of their exact location within the trail system. As evening approached, the voice mimicry ceased abruptly, leaving them alone in an unfamiliar section of forest with limited daylight remaining. They attempted to retrace their path back to the main trail, but found that many of the landmarks they remembered had either changed or were not where they expected them to be. Their situation became increasingly desperate as darkness fell and temperatures began dropping toward freezing levels. Yvette later recalled that their ordeal continued for 3 days, during which they wandered through dense forest terrain while attempting to find their way back to civilization. They rationed their limited food supplies and found water from mountain streams, but hypothermia and exhaustion gradually weakened their ability to make rational decisions about navigation and survival strategies. On the morning of October 16th, Connor and Derek had vanished from their makeshift shelter while Yvette slept. She woke to find herself alone with no indication of where her companions had gone or whether they had left voluntarily. Their backpacks and personal belongings remained at the shelter, suggesting they had not planned to travel far from their resting place. Yvette spent another day searching for Connor and Derek before accepting that she needed to focus on her own survival and attempt to reach help. She followed what appeared to be a game trail leading downhill, reasoning that it would eventually connect with human-used paths or roads. Her navigation proved correct, and she reached a logging road on October 17th, where she was discovered by forestry workers conducting routine patrols. Search and rescue operations began immediately upon Yvette's rescue, involving over 40 personnel and helicopter support. Despite extensive efforts covering hundreds of square kilometers, authorities never found any trace of Connor or Derek. The official investigation attributed their disappearance to environmental exposure and disorientation, noting that autumn weather conditions in the mountains could quickly become life-threatening for unprepared hikers. The recording equipment Derek had been carrying was never recovered, though searchers did locate one tape recorder near the canyon rim containing their experimental recordings. Analysis of these tapes revealed the expected echo patterns from their rock-dropping experiments. Yvette provided detailed statements to investigators about their experience with voice mimicry, but authorities found no scientific explanation for the phenomena she described. Mental health professionals who evaluated her noted severe trauma symptoms but concluded that her account remained consistent and credible despite its unusual elements. Following the incident, Yvette's family relocated to Mexico, where her father had accepted a job opportunity with an international mining company. She completed her education there and never returned to Canada for extended visits. Friends who maintained contact with her reported that she avoided outdoor recreational activities and seemed particularly uncomfortable in forested environments. The Vesman Provincial Trail remained open to hikers, though park authorities added warning signs about the importance of staying on marked trails and carrying appropriate emergency communication equipment. The Glacial Valley section, where the students had been conducting their research, was reclassified as an expert-level hiking area, with access restricted to experienced backcountry travelers who registered their planned routes with park officials. The Sierra de Cuchilla Verde forms a rugged chain of hills across southeastern Uruguay, reaching maximum elevations of 500 meters above the surrounding grasslands. This remote region encompassed mixed terrain, including dense eucalyptus forests, rocky outcroppings, and scattered sheep ranches operated for generations. The Sierra's isolation made it the ideal refuge for wildlife, though local ranchers occasionally reported livestock losses to unidentified predators. Veteran ranch foreman Sebastian Cardoza managed grazing operations along the Sierra's eastern slopes for decades, having worked the land since his youth. The ranch encompassed 2,000 hectares of grazing land extending from grasslands into forested hills. Sebastian employed traditional management methods, allowing flocks to graze freely while using trained dogs and periodic patrols to monitor their safety. Throughout summer 1976, Sebastian noticed unusual patterns in livestock losses that differed from typical puma or wild dog predation. Instead of scattered remains indicating feeding behavior, he discovered sheep killed by tremendous force and abandoned without consumption evidence. The injuries suggested an attacker of extraordinary size and strength, with damage inconsistent with known regional predators. Sebastian reported concerns to local authorities, but officials showed little interest in investigating remote livestock losses. Regional veterinarians examining deceased animals offered no definitive explanation for unusual injury patterns. Sebastian decided to address the problem himself by increasing patrols and establishing surveillance positions near the areas of attack. On August 23, 1976, Sebastian established a nighttime watch position overlooking a meadow where he had lost 6 sheep during the previous 2 weeks. He brought his rifle, binoculars, and sufficient supplies to maintain surveillance throughout the night, planning to drive away or eliminate the threat to his livestock. A younger ranch worker, Julian, recently returned after agricultural school, had joined the team and initially dismissed Sebastian's concerns. But after personally observing the damage to several carcasses, he grew uneasy. On the morning of August 24th, Julian discovered Sebastian's abandoned surveillance position. Sebastian's rifle lay beside his overturned chair, with clear signs of violent struggle in the disturbed vegetation. Most disturbing were the massive footprints, pressed deep into the soft earth, measuring over 50 centimeters in length, with distinct 5-toe impressions. Julian immediately contacted authorities and organized search efforts with neighboring ranchers. The investigation revealed additional evidence of an attack scattered across the meadow. Sebastian was eventually found injured but alive, suffering from multiple broken bones and extreme shock. He never fully recovered and retired from active ranch work. Investigating officers found no precedent for the type of damage observed. Local veterinarians confirmed no known Uruguayan predator possessed the necessary size or strength for such injuries. Official investigation attributed the incident to a feral dog attack, though this explanation failed to account for the physical evidence. Refusing to accept the official explanation, Julian took detailed notes and measurements of the tracks. The prints exhibited characteristics that distinguished them from known regional animals, displaying an opposable thumb structure and heel patterns consistent with bipedal locomotion. Local residents familiar with Sebastian weren't surprised by the attack details. Elderly ranchers spoke quietly of El Mono del Cerro, a creature their grandparents described in generational stories. These accounts described large, hair-covered beings inhabiting the Sierra's deepest forests, occasionally descending to prey on livestock when natural food became scarce. On October 15, 1978, approximately 2 years after Sebastian's injury, Julian led a small group of experienced ranchers into the interior forest to investigate new attack sites. They informed ranch hands they would be gone several days. The team returned shaken and silent. None spoke publicly about what they had encountered, but they immediately halted all highland grazing operations. Following their return, the Cardoza Ranch was sold to a Montevideo cattle operation. New owners experienced similar unexplained livestock losses and eventually abandoned attempts to use the Sierra's higher elevations for grazing. Local residents noted attacks decreased significantly after ranching operations ceased. A set of crude casts made from one of the large tracks was preserved by a former ranch hand. Though dismissed by most as folklore, they remain a point of quiet local interest. The Sierra de Cuchilla Verde continues harboring secrets local residents prefer not discussing with outsiders. Ranchers operating along the periphery maintain careful livestock watch and avoid grazing in certain areas, particularly during autumn months when El Mono del Cerro is believed to be most active. The Baitani Highlands spanned northeastern Assam's remote frontier, encompassing dense bamboo forests and steep ridges that formed part of the disputed India-China border region. During the 1960s, this area remained largely unmapped and unsettled, with scattered tribal villages maintaining tenuous connections to the outside world. The region's strategic importance increased following border tensions, leading to isolated military observation posts throughout the highlands. Following the 1962 Sino-Indian War, Indian forces maintained remote outpost networks designed to monitor potential frontier incursions. These positions, typically manned by two-soldier teams, served as early warning systems for unusual border activity. Post-isolation required soldiers to be self-sufficient for extended periods, relying on periodic supply drops and radio communications with headquarters. One observation post was situated on a ridge 3 kilometers from the abandoned Buddhist monastery ruins, which had been destroyed during previous regional conflicts. The position offered excellent valley visibility while remaining concealed from casual observation. A small shelter constructed from local materials provided basic protection from harsh winter weather at elevations above 2,000 meters. In December 1963, soldiers Ravi Palakar and Nalin Das were assigned to maintain this remote post during heightened border vigilance. Palakar, 24 and a veteran of border deployments, served as a senior team member responsible for communications and tactical decisions. Das, 21 and relatively inexperienced with mountain warfare, was assigned to gain frontier operations experience. The soldiers established a routine quickly, dividing observation duties, equipment maintenance, and communication schedules with base headquarters. Their position required maintaining nighttime fires for warmth and cooking, using deadfall collected from surrounding bamboo forests. During daylight hours, they patrolled nearby ridges and valleys, documenting unusual activity or environmental changes. After 1 week, both soldiers began reporting unusual phenomena during nightly radio communications. They described loud howling sounds originating from multiple positions around their location, often continuing for hours. The howls possessed characteristics unlike known regional wildlife, combining human vocalization elements with sounds no human throat could produce. Additionally, they reported finding large rocks thrown into their camp during nights, apparently from surrounding forest positions. These rocks were too large and heavy for accurate human throwing across involved distances, and soldiers found no evidence of responsible parties. Rock throwing appeared deliberately harassing rather than intended to cause serious harm. Military communications records indicate headquarters initially attributed reports to stress and isolation common among remote mountain post soldiers. However, consistent and detailed reports from both soldiers suggested something unusual was occurring. Orders were issued for heightened vigilance and documentation of potential hostile activity evidence. On December 18, 1963, radio contact with the observation post ceased abruptly during scheduled evening communication. Repeated re-establishment attempts over 24 hours proved unsuccessful, prompting headquarters to organize relief missions investigating the situation. Weather conditions and difficult terrain delayed the relief team's arrival for 3 days. The recovery team discovered the observation post in complete disorder. The soldiers' shelter was partially destroyed, with structural supports torn away and equipment scattered across wide areas. Most disturbing were numerous footprints surrounding the camp, measuring approximately 60 centimeters in length with clear 5-toe impressions and apparent claw marks extending from each digit. Nalin Das was found 50 meters from the destroyed camp, alive but in severe psychological distress. His eyes were swollen completely shut from apparent repeated facial blows, displaying extreme trauma symptoms, making coherent communication impossible. Medical personnel noted his injuries appeared inconsistent with combat wounds or typical accident trauma. During brief lucidity periods, Das made statements that recovery personnel found difficult to interpret or believe. He claimed something emerged from the forest and systematically destroyed their camp, while he and Palakar attempted defense. According to fragmented accounts, The forest itself came alive and attacked them, with trees moving independently and ground shifting beneath their feet. Despite extensive searches of the surrounding area, the recovery team found no trace of Ravi Palakar. His personal equipment and weapons remained at camp, suggesting he hadn't attempted voluntary position evacuation. Search efforts continued for 2 weeks, but failed to locate evidence of his fate or whereabouts. Official reports classified him as missing in action, presumed dead due to unknown hostile activity. Military investigators examining the scene found several aspects difficult to explain through conventional analysis. Observation post damage appeared caused by tremendous physical force applied intelligently and purposefully, rather than randomly. Footprint patterns around the camp indicated systematic movement by something requiring nearly 2-meter strides. Das spent his remaining life institutionalized, never recovering from the trauma experienced during the incident. Villagers in surrounding areas began hanging bells from their homes, claiming these would keep night watchers blind and prevent similar attacks on their communities.